information.
TNT Radio.
Welcome back to the David Curtin Show here on today's News Talk TNT, and it's really good to have with me as my first guest Hugh McCarthy, who has been a primary school head teacher, was doing that job for 23 years, I think, something like that, and is also the director of two of Northern Ireland's major education council, and also a member of PANDA and Collateral Global, which looks into the backlash of the COVID pandemic and all those kind of things that happened. Anyway, Hugh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a post-primary school actually that I was a principal of, for the record.
Oh yeah, no, thank you so much. Well, I would like to ask you about things to do with education, but just before I delve into that, I specifically want to ask you about the RSE and how that is in Northern Ireland, because I know that's something that people are very, very concerned about. But just as you've been involved in education for such a long time, you were a head teacher. What sort of changes in general have you seen in education over the decades since you started up to now?
Well, I think schools are much more open and much more accessible and much more accountable. Parents listening to this will probably perhaps disagree with that. But I do remember talking to the chair of my governors, who was a local clergyman, and saying we're accessible authority. As we know, you can't meet a bank manager or anyone like that these days to give off to, whereas schools are relatively open as our ministers, and the frustrations of society tended to walk in through the door. That was one thing, and so we're accessible, and I think more accountable, and I think it's a good thing. The other thing, the second thing I was going to say was, I think too, there's a different relationship between the teachers and children. I think it is more respectful than it was in, shall I say, my earlier days, and much more attempt is made to make it what should be a collaborative, cooperative effort. I think those are the two things that have changed most. I think the curriculum and schools' modalities are largely the same as when we were at school.
Okay, that is something that maybe, I don't know if everyone would see that, but that's great, and you see that in Northern Ireland there where you are. But I know some people are very concerned, perhaps, that with this relationships and sex education coming in all over, it's coming in England through the Tories, Wales through Labour, in Scotland through the SNP, and in Northern Ireland it's happening as well. And I know there's been a lot of backlash against this. I mean, what is the situation with this relationships and sex education specifically in Northern Ireland at the moment?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's more the amendments to RSE. Schools have always taught elements of that. So it's and secondly, actually very appropriate that we're speaking today, because the Alliance Party is introducing an attempt to mandate it across Northern Ireland. So in my view, we're starting at the wrong place. I would have thought it should have been preferable to start at the acts that lead to sexual relationships, and sexual relationships with minors are of course illegal and inappropriate. So we should really be starting from that point. I'm all for applying science and the law, as long as actually that's exactly what we do. The Secretary of State, to answer your question directly, the Secretary of State ushered in, just before the establishment of the devolved government, these amendments to relationships and sexuality in the school curriculum. Our issue is who should decide what is appropriate and when it's appropriate. Are these really matters for school? I'm in agreement with the Minister of Education. These are not matters for school. These are matters for perhaps church and certainly for parents to decide their value systems in relation to this. Schools should be responsible for teaching, reading, writing, volcanoes, maths, and elements of this issue. But the nitty-gritty of it is a value system for parents, and that's where it should be left. And that's what the law says, actually. The law in Northern Ireland, set down by the Education Reform Order, makes it quite clear, and the Secretary of State underpinned it in Westminster, that the Board of Governors is responsible for the determination of the curriculum in Northern Ireland schools. And it should be in accordance with the ethos of the school, period. Now, what the Alliance Party is seeking to do today, in my understanding, is override parental involvement in the determination of the curriculum. And the Education Reform Order was introduced specifically to give parents a say in the running of the schools. Now, that's a long answer because it's a complicated issue and people out there need to know their rights and enforce them, not allow political parties to ride roughshod over parental rights in this matter. And they're quite clear.
I really appreciate your long answer because, I mean, it seems like the situation in Northern Ireland is far, far better than the situation in the other parts of the United Kingdom, where you've got this Education Reform Act that specifically enshrines the parents' rights as primary educators of their children, and also for the ethos of the school to be set by the Board of Governors, who hopefully will be accountable to parents as well, which is how it should be.
Parents should, and I realize we have a short amount of time, but it is incumbent upon parents to establish who is on their Board of Governors and how they got there. The majority of schools in Northern Ireland are church-based because of our history, Catholic and state. There are 4 church representatives in pretty much every Board of Governor in Northern Ireland and 4 parent representatives. That's a majority of the governors. Now, they should be setting the ethos. And the Board of Governors cannot change its curriculum policy without consulting parents. These things are enshrined in our law. Parents need not only to know it, but to do something about it.
News Talk, TNT. Now, Hugh McCarthy is here. Hugh's from Northern Ireland. When we're talking about relationships and sex education and how the situation is in Northern Ireland, which is a little bit different to how it is in England, Scotland, and Wales. Every different part of the United Kingdom seems to be approaching this in different ways and as a sort of different levels of progress in this. Obviously, I'm against rolling back anything that is harmful to children. And now, Hugh, you were just explaining how there were quite a lot of protections in the law in Northern Ireland against introducing very sexualized content, which be the kind of things we've seen in other parts of the UK where children are encouraged to learn about self-stimulation, for example, when they're really young, and transgenderism and all of this kind of stuff. But then you also mentioned there's this party called the Alliance. Now, I know what that is, but maybe people in England, Scotland, and Wales don't know what the Alliance is. And who are they allied to, and what are they doing to undermine parents' rights? And will they be successful?
Well, the power sharing executive in Northern Ireland has 5 parties. 2, broadly speaking, pro the union with the UK, 2 pro a united Ireland, and the Alliance Party sort of in the middle. And the Alliance Party originally was established for to promote civil liberties. It does appear to have moved far from that, and its COVID policies were very totalitarian. It wanted to mandate those things which it couldn't get agreement over, and it seems to be doing it again. Today in Stormont, we're having a debate and probably a vote on whether they can pass this into law. Will they be successful? Well, as with many things in Northern Ireland, it's evenly balanced.
Mm.
It has to be said the Minister of Education represents a party which is opposed to what you've just described. And I would advise any parent to read or at least check either in my Substack, but to read the WHO standards for sexuality in education and the international technical guidance, and it'll make your hair stand on end.
Mm.
One of the things it starts with, and this is where the ideology is wrong, a child is regarded as being a sexual being from the beginning. For me, that's
That's
horrific.
shocking.
And what, I mean, you don't have time here. I have the abbreviated version beside me. What is required for 6 and 9-year-olds about gender diversity and that you can change your gender just like that. Now, what should have happened here? I'm all for them applying the evidence, but those countries which led us into this, based on a thing called a Dutch protocol, introduced by a Finnish doctor, Dr. Caltielli, are actually leading us out. She's reviewed the evidence and found that the evidence supporting transition was faulty and flawed, based on a very small sample. And she has totally reversed her position after setting up gender transition clinics. So the countries which let us in are now leading us out, except Northern Ireland is slow. The Cass report should have ended this. The Cass report, and I'll quote, if I may, let's get the words right. The National Health Service redrafted guidelines to remind doctors, so why should teachers or politicians change this? That children may be simply going through a transient phase, and they now recommend clinical management procedures. Talking with. The report goes on to say allowing children to socially transition could have significant effects on them. It could indeed. Better information was needed on the outcomes. And the research is quite clear. Of the order of 80% of the children who socially transition, who are minded to, will actually grow out of it. At least 80%. And the evidence is equally clear that those who do socially transition are, Swedish research found that sex reassigned individuals had the worst outcomes in morbidity, psychiatric ill health, and mortality, like suicide. I'm all for the Alliance Party following the science, but let's follow the science.
Well, let's hope they do and they don't follow ideology, because it seems over the last 10 years, we've just had this gender ideology and queer theory, which has come out of crazy academic, institutions. Well, in institutions that have got a good reputation, but the stuff that they've been churning out is absolute nonsense. I mean, anyone with, just any common sense could have seen that this is absolute nonsense from the beginning. But now it's come to the point where we've got the Cass report, which is being taken seriously because it's a, UK government sanctioned report. Let's hope that they take note of that. And I'm really glad you mentioned the World Health Organization and their grid for what children should be learning at different ages, because that's where a lot of it comes from. It's coming from the globalist sphere, and it's being implemented in different nations.
Could I also point out there that the WHO in the small print recognizes that one size doesn't fit all. That's the phrase it uses. And it recognizes the role of parents and faith-based organizations. But you don't hear that. But that's part of that same document. It fastens the rights of churches and parents, actually.
Well, that's a good thing. And that's not something that we hear, because it seems the people that are pushing this are just completely hell-bent on bringing this, deviant teaching, as I would say, to children and things that would sexualize them. But I hope that, the Parliament there, or Stormont anyway, that the ministers in Stormont don't vote for this. But, if they do, it seems it would go against what's actually been set in law in Northern Ireland already, which seems to give them children and parents much more protection than what you have in England, Scotland, and Wales. Look, I've got a comment from you for you from a listener. Kathy Gray says, "Thank you, Hugh, for speaking out today and all your hard work around this awful situation." And and I would thank you as well, because we all need to stand up together. Everyone who's decent, everyone who cares about children and doesn't want them to be confused and twisted by activists. We need to speak out, and we need to speak up. And I would just say, let kids be kids. Why would anyone want to put this crazy gender ideology on kids, especially primary school kids? They should just be left alone to play and learn things which are of benefit to them, not to be, have all this sexualizing, degenerate material pushed in their faces. So, our last comment to you, Hugh. We just got a minute or so, but anything else you want to say at the end about, what's going on in Northern Ireland?
Yes, parents, let me remind you, have the right to say no. You have the right to withdraw your child. You have a right to know the curriculum and a right to withdraw your child from parts of it with which you do not agree. As you said, David, you can oppose it morally, scientifically, or legally, but just say no.
Fantastic. Just say no and protect your children. Thank you so much, Hugh, for joining me on today's News Talk, TNT.